The field stretched out under the early autumn sun, its silence interrupted only by the distant hum of crickets. A light breeze rustled through the tall grasses, carrying the faint scent of decaying leaves. It was a serene scene, seemingly untouched by violence, until the couple wandered too far from the dirt path. Pearl and Raymond, a young couple who were out on a Sunday stroll, froze mid-step. Beneath the gnarled branches of a crabapple tree, two figures lay unnaturally still. Raymond took a step closer, his heart pounding. "Stay back," he whispered, though Pearl had no intention of moving closer. Edward Hall's lifeless body was stretched out neatly on his back, his glasses still perched on his nose as if they'd merely fallen asleep. Beside him, Eleanor Mills laid sprawled with a grotesque finality. Her throat had been slashed so deeply that the wound gaped, red and raw in the morning light. Around them, scraps of paper fluttered in the breeze, love letters, their words of devotion smeared with the dew of the grass. Pearl stifled a scream, but the sound of it echoed in her chest. Raymond pulled her away, his eyes wide with horror. The serenity of the meadow was shattered. By nightfall, the town of New Brunswick would be alight with gossip and speculation, the gruesome discovery spreading like wildfire. No one yet knew that the murders beneath the crabapple tree would become one of the most sensational crimes in American history. But the echoes of that day would linger for decades, a chilling reminder of love, betrayal, and the shadowy lines that lie between justice and privilege. Welcome to Beneath the Shadows, where we delve into the mysteries, secrets, and scandals that history tried to bury. I'm your host, Travis Fenn, coming at you this Wednesday from the darkness of the Shadow Realm, my office studio here in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and I'm so glad that you're joining me today for today's journey into the dark corners of the past. Before we step into the shadows, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for coming out, for being here, for taking time to listen to the show. Your support keeps this show alive and growing. If you enjoy what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you may be listening. The ratings, those reviews really help, so that would be great. It's much appreciated, and I can't say thank you enough. So your feedback helps us reach even more history lovers, true crime fanatics, and overall odd folks just like you. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're hungry for even more untold stories, mysteries, and behind-the-scenes content, join us on Instagram or Patreon for exclusive updates and bonus material. And while it's around, you can find TikTok too. There is TikTok out there as well. Who knows how long it'll be around, but it is there. Patreon episodes will resume on Valentine's Day, Friday, February 14th. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And thank you for checking those out. It means so much to me. Now, let's pull back the curtain on one of America's most chilling and scandalous murder mysteries. Today, we're stepping into the fields of New Brunswick, New Jersey, to uncover the story of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills, two lovers whose tragic deaths beneath a crabapple tree would spark a media frenzy, mesmerize a community, and leave behind a trail of questions that linger to this day. All right, and if you hear any sniffles or, stuffiness, or if my voice sounds a little bit different or anything, it's because I'm just a tad bit sick. Nothing crazy, a little throat scratch, a little stuffy nose, just kind of some extra nasally drainage and shit like that. So lots of fun. But if there's any difference in sound, that is partially why. And I'm going to try to be more kind of natural sounding today. Like I tried to do the other week. I write a script every week, but I don't necessarily love sticking to a script. It does help me stay, in order, but I feel like it helps me connect with each and every one of you a little bit more if I'm a little bit more natural and silly and goofy and myself a little bit. But I know not every topic is, silly and goofy fucking topic, but I still feel like it helps be take some of the more serious and intense topics and make them a little bit lighter and more digestible. So it's what I'm going to try to do. I'm trying to work on that as I go through this, and I hope people can appreciate that. So thank you. Let's get underway with Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills and the Hall-Mills murders. Edward Hall's polished shoes clicked against the cobblestones as he crossed Nielsen Street, heading towards the church he called his sanctuary for nearly a decade. A man of medium height with a scholarly air, he carried himself with the calm assurance of someone accustomed to respect. The townspeople of New Brunswick knew Reverend Hall as a kind of charismatic leader, a man who could deliver a sermon that motivated even the most stoic parishioner. Jesus. Yet, for all his public virtue, Eric, I almost called him Eric. I don't know. Edward harbored a secret. His gaze lingered a moment too long when Eleanor Mills, the choir's soprano, sang the opening hymn. Her voice, sweet and lifting, filled the cavernous church with a haunting beauty that made the stained-glass windows seem to shimmer extra bright. Eleanor was younger than Edward, with auburn hair that caught the light, and a laugh that could draw even the grumpiest parishioner into a smile. She was married to James Mills, the church sexton, but their marriage was filled with conflict and lacked the spark she craved. Edward and Eleanor's friendship began innocently enough, with shared conversations after Sunday services and the occasional letter exchanged. But soon, these letters grew bolder, filled with sentiments neither dared to speak aloud. Edward, trapped in a passionless marriage to Frances Stevens Hall, a woman of considerable wealth and icy demeanor, found a kindred spirit in Eleanor. And now that I mentioned her, let's take a moment to look at Frances Hall, Edward's wife here, and look into the family that she was bred to be a part of. Frances Hall's parents, Frances Kirby Stevens and Mary Noel Carpenter, were prominent figures in New Brunswick, New Jersey, representing a marriage of two wealthy and influential families. Their backgrounds and social status played a significant role in shaping Frances Hall's privileged upbringing and her later focus on preserving the family's reputation. And so Frances Hall's parents, Frances Kirby Stevens was born into the distinguished Stevens family, which had long-standing prominence in New Jersey society. The Stevens lineage was deeply rooted in real estate development, business, and civic involvement, giving the family both economic power and social clout. Frances Kirby Stevens was a successful businessman, leveraging the family's wealth and connections to manage and expand their holdings in real estate and other ventures. His financial stability allowed him to maintain a life of luxury and ensure his children were raised in an environment of privilege and refinement. He was described as a dignified and commanding figure, embodying the values of the Gilded Age elite. He instilled in his children a sense of pride in the Stevens name and emphasized the importance of upholding the family's status. And Mary Noel Carpenter was born into the influential Carpenter family. It's also spelt a little weird. It's not Carpenter, it's Carpenter. So it's Carpender, not T, it's D. Another prominent and affluent New Jersey lineage. The Carpenters were known for their wealth, social standing, and contributions to the community, making Mary an ideal match for Frances Kirby Stevens. Mary's middle name, Noel, reflects her connection to yet another esteemed family in the area. The Noels and Carpenters were part of a network of intermarried elite families who shaped the social and economic landscape of New Jersey during the 19th century. And something about the description of intermarried elite families sounds incesty to me for some reason. And, going back in history, it wouldn't really be a shocker if that was the case, because incest was definitely a big part in empires and trying to maintain bloodlines and wealth in the family and a whole bunch of other shit for elite clergy. It's not clergy, elite members though of society. So very interesting to see that, and that's what it made me think of, just to throw that out there, I guess. As a woman of high social standing, Mary Noel Carpenter was active in charitable and community endeavors, reflecting the expectations placed upon women of her class. She was likely involved in philanthropic activities and social events that enhanced the family's reputation. Mary was the quintessential Gilded Age matron, dedicated to her family and the management of the grand household. She played a key role in shaping her children's upbringing, instilling in them a sense of duty to the family and society. The union of Frances Kirby Stevens and Mary Noel Carpenter was a strategic alliance that merged two powerful families, further solidifying their influence in New Jersey. They lived in a grand estate in New Brunswick, which became a hub of social activity and a symbol of their wealth and prestige. Together, Francis and Mary would have 3 children: Francis Noel Stevens, later Francis Hall, which is one of our main people in this story, one of our main characters in this story. The eldest and most prominent of their children, Frances inherited her parents' focus on social standing and their determination to protect the family's name. Henry Stevens, a strong-willed and assertive figure, Henry was the protector of the family during the Hall's Mill murder trial. And William Stevens, also known as Willie, the youngest and most eccentric of the siblings. Willie's peculiar behavior often drew attention, particularly during the infamous trial. The Stevens-Carpenter union ensured their descendants lived comfortably, enjoying the privileges of wealth and high social standing. Their wealth provided Frances and her siblings with access to elite education, luxurious lifestyles, and powerful social connections. Frances Stevens and Mary Carpenter's emphasis on maintaining the family's social position profoundly impacted Frances Hall, the daughter there. She grew up surrounded by wealth, tradition, and an expectation to uphold the family's legacy. These values likely influenced her reactions to personal challenges, including her husband's infidelity and the Hall's Mill murder scandal. For Frances, preserving the family's name and reputation was not just a priority, it was an obligation handed down from her parents. Frances married Edward Wheeler Hall in 1911. Edward, a young and rising Episcopal minister, offered a respectable match for Frances, even if he did not come from the same social and financial standing. Their union was often perceived as one of convenience rather than passion. Frances's wealth provided financial stability for Edward's ministry and social ambitions, while his role as a clergyman gave Frances a respectable place in New Brunswick society. However, the marriage was strained, with rumors of Frances's controlling nature and Edward's growing emotional distance. The couple did not have children, a fact that some sources suggest added tension to the relationship. Frances focused her attention on managing their home and maintaining her family's reputation, while Edward sought fulfillment in his role at the church, and later in his affair with Eleanor Mills. All right, so we've learned about Frances, who Frances was, and the wealthy family that she was heir to. Now, let's bounce back into more about Eleanor and Edward and their relationship, their scandalous little affair that they had got going on. So, for Eleanor, Edward represented something larger than her modest life. He was her confidant, her muse, and above all, her escape. Their affair was a dangerous dance, a stolen moment here, a whispered promise there. They knew the risks, but neither could resist. The letters, laden with poetic flourishes and expressions of love, would later reveal the depth of their connection. "My dearest Eleanor," one began, "my heart aches for the next moment I may hold you in my arms." She responded with equal fervor, "Edward, my soul is yours, now and always." As the weeks turned into months, their stolen moments grew more frequent. Yet, beneath the surface of their passion, a shadow loomed, one that neither could ignore. The townspeople whispered, Frances grew suspicious, and Eleanor, ever the romantic, seemed blind to the danger encircling them both. The time went on, and on the evening of September 14th, 1922, it was unusually still, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Edward Hall slipped out of his home with practiced ease, careful not to wake Frances. He would often tell her that he was out working late at the church, but his true destination was the secluded field on the outskirts of town. There, beneath the crabapple tree that had become their clandestine meeting spot, Eleanor Mills waited. Eleanor's heart raced as she saw Edward approach, his figure illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. She clutched her shawl tightly against the chill, her breath visible in the cool night air. They had met here before, but tonight felt different. The tension that had been building for weeks hung heavy between them. "Edward," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I can't keep living like this. The whispers, the looks at church, James is growing suspicious." And James is her husband, James Mills, the church sexton there. Edward took her hands in his expression earnest. "Eleanor, you're the only light in my life. If we could just—" He hesitated, the weight of his next words pressing down on him. "If we could leave this place, start somewhere fresh, far away. Would you come with me?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "You know I would, Edward, But what about Francis? In your position at the church, it's not so simple. Before Edward could respond, a rustling in the bushes nearby sent a jolt of fear between them. He turned towards the sound, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady despite his unease. Silence. Nothing. Eleanor clutched his arm. "Maybe it's just an animal," she whispered, though her voice portrayed her doubt. Unbeknownst to them, they were not alone that night. In the shadows, hidden from view, a figure watched their every move. The events of that evening would spiral into a tragedy neither Edward nor Eleanor could have foreseen. By the time the sun rose, their secret would be exposed, in the most violent and public way imaginable. As the sun rose the next day, Edward and Eleanor failed to return home. Both James and Francis, their spouses, grew worried as the day passed. It was unlike Edward to not return home and not call. So, what would they do? Where could they be? What happened to Edward and Eleanor? The day would pass with no word and no sight, no sound from either of them. On the morning of September 16th, 1922, it was cool and crisp, the sky painted with streaks of gold and lavender. Pearl Baumer and Raymond Schneider, a young couple with no knowledge of the tragedy that had unfolded 2 nights prior, set out for a walk along an overgrown trail just beyond the town. They had no particular destination in mind, only a desire to enjoy the last warm days of autumn. The path led down a small clearing dominated by an ancient crabapple tree. The ground beneath the gnarled branches was littered with fallen fruit and leaves. But as they drew closer, Pearl's attention was drawn to an unnatural shape among the debris. "Raymond," she said softly, her voice trembling, "look." What they saw stopped them cold. Edward Hall lay on his back, his legs neatly crossed, his head turned slightly to the side. His glasses were still perched on his nose, giving him an almost peaceful appearance. He was found with his right arm positioned to touch a woman's neck. His hat covered his face, which concealed the gunshot wound to his head. He wore a pair of glasses. There was a small bruise on the tip of his ear, and abrasions were found on his left little finger and right index finger. A wound was found 5 inches below his kneecap on the calf of his right leg. His gold watch was missing, and there were coins in his pockets. Just inches away, Eleanor Mill's body was sprawled at an odd angle, her throat with a grotesque open wound. Her brown silk scarf was stained crimson, and her eyes stared blankly at the canopy above. She was wearing a blue dress with red polka dots, black silk stockings, and brown shoes. Her arm had a bruise, and there was a tiny cut on her lip. Her left hand had been positioned to touch the man's right thigh. Around the bodies, scraps of paper fluttered in the light breeze. Raymond bent down to pick one up, his hands trembling. The words scrawled across the page made his blood run cold. They were love letters, their contents revealing a forbidden passion. "Sweetheart, my true heart," Eleanor Mills had written in one. "I know there are girls with more shapely bodies, but I'm not caring what they have. I have the greatest part of all the blessings. A man's noble, deep, true, eternal love. How impatient I am, and will be. I want to look up in your dear face for hours as you touch my body close." The pastor's replies were equally affectionate. "Darling Wonder Heart," he had written, interesting, "I just want to crush you for 2 hours. I want to see you Friday night alone by our road, where we can let out, unrestrained, that universe of joy and happiness we call ours." He signed himself DTL, short for Der Treuer Liebhaber, Thy True Lover in German, and Liebhaber, Liebhaber. I don't know German. I'm sorry. Didn't look it up either. So, yeah. Miss Mills, preferring a less formal endearment, referred to the pastor as Babykins. Good old Babykins. Pearl let out a sharp gasp, stepping back. "We have to tell someone," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Raymond nodded, dropping the paper as though it had burned him. The couple hurried to the nearest house, their footsteps quickened by a mixture of fear and urgency. By the time they reached the nearest phone, the gruesome discovery was already seared into their minds. Within hours, the news spread around New Brunswick like wildfire. Curious townfolk, unable to resist the pull of the morbid curiosity, descended upon the crime scene. The once secluded clearing became a chaotic spectacle. trampled by dozens of onlookers, which is great for crime scenes. Definitely have as many people as you can at a crime scene. That's what they always say. Get as many people who don't know shit about what they're doing at the crime scene, and you'll figure it out. The local authorities, unprepared for the case of this magnitude, struggled to maintain order. The frenzied coverage turned the old Phillips farm, where the bodies were found, into a major tourist attraction, as I kind of just mentioned, but on weekends, the crime scene became a virtual carnival with vendors hawking popcorn, peanuts, soft drinks, and balloons to the hordes of the morbidly curious who had arrived, at the rate of 1,000 cars per day, in one of the quotes it says. 1,000 cars per day. So many people coming to see this crime scene. It's such a popular thing, such a spectacle down here. Within a few weeks, the crabapple tree had been completely stripped of every branch and bit of bark by ghoulish souvenir hunters, while one enterprising individual peddled samples of the dirt surrounding the now infamous tree for 25 cents a bag. He's like, yo, if you want a piece of history right here, get some of this dirt from this fucking crabapple tree. Yeah, get it, 25 cents, got you. It's like selling some fucking weird drugs back in the day. The murder intrigue drugs. Get your fucking souvenirs. Get your fucking souvenirs right now. Back on the 16th, as the bodies were finally removed and the crowd dispersed, whispers of suspicion began to ripple throughout the town. Who could have committed such a heinous act? And why? The love letters hinted at a scandalous affair, but they raised more questions than they answered. For now, all anyone knew was that the tranquility of their small town had been shattered, and the mystery of the crabapple tree murders was only just beginning. Sheriff Elmer G. Stearns stood at the edge of the clearing, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The crime scene, though now silent, was a chaos of disrupted evidence. Footprints crisscrossed the area, trampled by the curious crowds who had descended on the site before the sheriff could secure it. Yet Stearns remained determined to piece together what he could find from the fragments left behind. Photograph the scene first, Stearns ordered his deputies. Every scrap of paper, every position of the bodies, document it all. The coroner's initial examination revealed chilling details. Edward Hall had been shot once in the head with precision. The bullet entered just above his right ear. Eleanor Mills' death was far more savage. She had been shot 3 times in the head. Her throat had been slashed multiple times, nearly severing her head. Deep bruises on her arms suggested she had struggled. In the mutilation of her tongue was an act that spoke of anger, possibly hatred. The love letters strewn around the scene were quickly collected. Their contents, filled with expressions of passion, pointed unmistakably to an affair between the victims. But the investigation's early focus turned to those who had the most to lose, and the most to gain, from their deaths. Frances Hall, Edward's wife, was among the first to be questioned. A widow of considerable wealth and standing, Frances maintained an air of composure that some found unnerving. Her relationship with Edward had long been rumored to be strained, with whispers of her jealousy and her sharp temper making the rounds among church members. Frances denied any involvement, insisting she had spent the night in her home, surrounded by her brothers, Henry and Willie Stevens, conveniently enough. James Mills, Eleanor's husband, also found himself under scrutiny. Known for his quiet demeanor, James admitted he had been aware of his wife's infidelity, but claimed he had chosen to ignore it for the sake of their children. He had apparently asked Frances something to the nature of, "Do you think they may have eloped?" His alibi for the night of the murders was thin, yet his grief seemed genuine, and he expressed way more grief than Frances ever did. Definitely had some genuine grief and upset feelings that came over him. Some genuine sadness that came over him when he found out. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Jane Gibson, a local pig farmer, came forward with an astonishing claim. Known in town as the Pig Lady, due to her eccentricities, Jane told police she had been out in the fields the night of September 14th and had witnessed a confrontation near the crabapple tree. "I saw 4 people," Jane told the authorities, 2 men and 2 women. They were arguing, loud enough to hear from my field. She described seeing a scuffle while trying to mount her horse and hearing a gunshot, followed by a woman's scream. "I didn't dare get closer, but I know what I saw." Jane's testimony sent shockwaves through the investigation. Though some dismissed her as unreliable, her account hinted at the presence of others at the scene, a detail that cast doubt on the theory of a simple crime of passion. The sheriff's department now faced a web of conflicting narratives, with each thread pulling them deeper into the mystery. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation grew increasingly convoluted. Rumors swirled in the town, implicating everyone from jilted lovers to hired assassins. Yet, amid the chaos, one thing remained clear. The murders of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills were no random act of violence. This was personal, calculated, and shrouded in secrets that the town of New Brunswick were desperate to uncover. As the time passed and leads fell cold, nothing would come in the investigation. By late 1926, 4 years later, in a bid to boost its circulation, William Randolph Hearst's fledgling tabloid, the New York Daily Mirror, dredged up some new evidence in the case and plastered the front page of its July 16, 1926 edition with a sensational headline: Hall Mills Murder Mystery Barred. Over the course of the following week, the tabloid trumpeted one frenzied charge after another. Hall's bribery revealed, Mrs. Hall's spies held town in terror, how Hidden Hand balked Hall murder justice. Very interesting headlines. How Hidden Hand balked Hall murdered justice. The strategy worked. Not only did the Mirror's circulation jump, but its strident calls for action forced the governor of New Jersey to reopen the case. Finally, on January 28, 1926, Mrs. Frances Stevens Hall, along with her brothers Willie and Henry, were arrested for the murder of her husband, Edward, and his mistress, Mrs. Eleanor Mills. The state charged Frances Stevens Hall, Edward's widow, and her two brothers, Willie and Henry Stevens, with the murders of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. Like I just said, the trial would prove to be one of the most sensational spectacles in American legal history. The courtroom in Somerville, New Jersey, was a theater of drama and scandal. Reporters from across the country crowded the aisles, sketching scenes and scribbling notes to feed the voracious appetite of the public. Societal women, in pearls and furs, mingled with curious locals, all eager to witness the unfolding of a real-life tragedy. Special prosecutor Alexander Simpson, renowned for his sharp wit and theatrical flair, spearheaded the case against Frances Hall and her brothers. Simpson argued that the murders were born out of jealousy and family honor. The prosecution painted Frances as a woman scorned, someone who could not tolerate the humiliation of her husband's very public affair. Her brothers, fiercely protective of their sister's reputation and inheritance, had allegedly assisted in carrying out the brutal crime. Jane Gibson, the so-called pig lady, was the star witness for the prosecution, although her eccentricity and frequent shifts in her testimony made her a controversial figure. Her claims remained at the center of the trial. Gibson recounted, yet again, her account of that fateful night, the heated argument, the cries for help, and the chilling sounds of gunshots. Frances was there, Jane insisted, her voice quivering but absolute. I saw her. She was arguing with the Mills woman. The prosecution presented the love letters between Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills as damning evidence of the affair, emphasizing how their exposure humiliated Frances. The graphic autopsy results underscored the brutality of the crime, and Simpson argued that the sheer savagery of Eleanor's death spoke of personal hatred. Hatred that Frances alone would have reason to harbor. The defense's case, led by Robert McCarter, focused on dismantling the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, particularly Jane Gibson, the pig lady. They portrayed her as an unreliable narrator, prone to exaggeration and fabrication. Her claims, they argued, could not be trusted, especially given her penchant for attention-seeking behavior. And yeah, she was brought in on like a fucking gurney on a hospital bed. She was wheeled into the fucking courtroom one of the days to do her testimony, or maybe the day of her testimony, and she was wheeled in a fucking hospital bed. Such an attention-seeking person. Maybe she needed it, though. I'm not sure if she actually needed to be in that bed. It seems a little absurd, but Frances Hall, dressed in mourning attire, and that's M-O-U-R-N, not mourning like, hey, good morning. It's like mourning like sad that someone died. Dressed in mourning attire, projected an image of poise and decorum throughout the proceedings. She took the stand in her own defense, denying any involvement in her husband's death. Her testimony was calm and measured, designed to evoke sympathy from the jury and the public. I loved my husband, Frances declared, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. We may have had our difficulties, as all married couples do, but I would never harm him. Henry and Willie Stevens, described by the defense as loyal brothers and upstanding citizens, maintained their innocence as well. They claimed they had spent the night of the murders at the Hall family estate, a considerable distance from the crime scene. Outside the courtroom, the trial became a media frenzy. Newspapers printed sensational headlines and detailed daily accounts, often focusing on the personalities and appearances of those involved, like Jane Gibson, the pig lady. Frances Hall was alternately portrayed as a cold-hearted murderer or a tragic figure wrongfully accused. Jane Gibson's colorful personality and bizarre antics made her a target of ridicule, but her testimony also captivated the readers. The case's blend of wealth, infidelity, and gruesome violence proved irresistible to the public. Radio broadcasts, still a novelty at this time, carried updates on the trial to a nation eager for every twist and turn. After weeks of testimony and fiery closing arguments, the jury deliberated. On December 3, 1926, Frances Hall and her brothers were acquitted on all charges. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Some spectators cheered, while others decried the verdict as a miscarriage of justice. For Frances, the acquittal was a public vindication, but the whispers of guilt never fully faded. Many believed that her wealth and influence had shielded her from accountability. For the families of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills, the verdict brought no closure, nothing at all. The question of who truly committed the murders beneath the crabapple tree remained unanswered. Following the trial, Frances retreated from public life, shielded by her family's wealth and influence. She remained in New Jersey for the rest of her life, living quietly and avoiding further public scrutiny. Frances Stevens Hall would finally pass away on December 19th, 1942, at the age of 68. And that kind of takes us out of this whole story here. The murders happened. Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills are both passed away. They could not find anyone who could be completely completely found guilty of committing these murders, and Frances Hall was acquitted along with her brothers. So with that, now, with all the details pulled out from beneath the shadows, let's head on over and check out today's main marks.
Quit it, I've been with it, got to get it with the main marks, don't you know how it goes? That's for sure, now you know with the main marks.
Number 1. The Hall-Mills murder case involved Edward Wheeler Hall, an Episcopal priest, and Eleanor Mills, a member of his choir with whom he was having an affair, both of whom were murdered on September 14th, 1922 in Somerset, New Jersey, United States. New Brunswick, Somerset, they had different names back in the day too. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of, all within this one little area, but this says Somerset, New Jersey, United States. Number 2. On September 16th, 2 days later, 1922, the bodies of Eleanor Mills and Edward Hall were discovered in a field near a farm in Somerset County, New Jersey. Both bodies were on their backs, both shot in the head with a .32 caliber pistol, the man once and the woman 3 times. Number 3. Edward and Eleanor's friendship had begun innocently enough, with shared conversations after Sunday services and the occasional letter exchanged. But, soon enough, those letters grew bolder, filled with sentiments neither dared speak aloud. Number 4. The original 1922 investigation by Joseph E. Stricker yielded no indictments. Continued speculation in the New York Daily Mirror, a William Randolph Hearst Rand paper, fueled by comments made by a man associated with one of Mrs. Hall's housekeepers, led Governor A. Harry Moore to order a second investigation and a trial in 1926. Number 5. The prosecution's key witness was Jane Gibson, also known as the Pig Lady. She was a pig farmer on whose properties the bodies were discovered. The defense portrayed Gibson as uneducated and crazy, and attempted to ruin her credibility. Gibson's account varied, differing what had been told to the police, to newspapers, and at trial, at which she testified from a hospital bed that had been rolled into the courtroom. Like I had mentioned, fucking wacky lady it seems like, but maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe that is what she's seen. I actually don't know why she was in this hospital bed either, but this was also 4 years after the incident, and I think she may have passed away not terribly long after this. I think it was a couple years, like 32 or something like that. Ultimately, all 3 defendants who were accused were acquitted. And number 6, new info. Francis Noel Stevens Hall was often described as homely and hard on the eyes. Not one to look twice at, I believe, was another one I didn't include on here. Also described as manly in one of the things I saw. It was mentioned that Edward obviously did not marry her for her good looks, but that she was not wholly unattractive. Ripping on her fucking looks. And another one was that the rest of her face and her forehead were the same size. So like the bottom half of her face and her forehead were of the same size. Her appearance was often ragged on, and she portrayed a stern, underwhelmed demeanor during most of the investigation and trial, even taking an extended trip to Italy that started in early 1923 and ended in 1924. She was there over a year. Some thought she was never going to come back, which would have made her look even more guilty than just fucking dipping out to a completely different country, different continent, different fucking place entirely. Makes you look. You already look fucking guilty doing that shit, but... And that's it for today's main marks. And with no one charged in this case, with this case being over 100 years old, over a century old, the case is likely to never be truly solved. So with that, let's head out of here and into today's final takeaway.
Quit it, I've been with it, got to get it with the main mark. Don't you know how it goes? That's for sure, now you know with the main mark.
So thank you for joining me today on this deep dive into the chilling tale of Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills. The Hall Mills murders remain one of the most haunting and perplexing cases in American history, shrouded in unanswered questions and unresolved mysteries. While the crabapple tree may have long since fallen, the story it sheltered continues to captivate and intrigue us. A testament to how love, betrayal, and scandal can leave echoes across time. If you enjoyed today's episode with my more mellow and kind of raspy voice, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave a rating, a review on your favorite podcast platform. Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're doing it, please, 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 please leave a rating and review. Apple Podcasts, I think, is the big one, but I know a lot of people listen elsewhere too, so please, if you can do that, it helps the show, it helps me, it's an amazing thing that you can do, and it's free, so I appreciate those who fucking do it. Thank you so much. Your feedback not only helps this podcast grow, but also lets me know what kind of stories you love. You know, if one episode gets a shit ton of love, a shit ton of looks at it, a shit ton of reviews that are great, you know, then I know people like that, which is good. I can touch back on topics that are similar to those episodes. So don't forget to follow Beneath the Shadows on Instagram at Beneath the Shadows Podcast for photos, updates, and behind the scenes content. Like I said before, I'm getting better on it, really trying to hook that up. We also have a TikTok if you want to check it out. Don't know how long TikTok will be around at this point, but we do have one that I try to keep up with and try to update every week. And if you're craving even more mysteries, head on over to Patreon, where I post exclusive episodes, 15 to 30 minutes in content, and extra content you won't hear anywhere else. So starting back up on Valentine's Day with that, gonna have shows every other week on Patreon. Those are 15 to 30 minute episodes, kind of small touches of just this and that kind of stuff. Depends on how long I get to research. Those will be coming out on Fridays now, though, instead of Thursdays. With the show shifted, I kind of shifted that out too. But thank you for checking those out. Thank you for being here. I really fucking appreciate you all. Thank you for exploring the shadows with me today. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, stay fucking healthy, because this scratchy throat bullshit is not my game. And keep seeking the stories that lie just beneath the surface. I'm Travis Fenn, and I'll see you in the next episode of Beneath the Shadows. Peace out.
Watch where you go, 'cause you never may know. Coming out from below, from beneath the shadow. The darkness will grow, the spirits and ghosts, and only one thing's for sure, just beneath the shadow.